If you're moving to the UK or visiting the UK, the most difficult thing you'll have to learn may not be the English language, but our insane system of weighing and measuring. Britain has officially been a metric country since we joined the EEC in 1973, but our attempts to implement metrication have been muddled, some would say half-hearted or even half-baked. If you're British, it feels normal, you grew up with it, but to an outsider, it's madness. During the COVID crisis, the British government announced that people should keep 2 metres apart for social distancing.
Where it is possible to keep 2 metres apart, people should. But where it is not, we will advise people to keep a social distance of 1 metre plus, meaning they should remain 1 metre apart.
Something that was understandably overlooked in the midst of a global pandemic was that the announcement was made by Boris Johnson and the government with metric measurements. In the US, the recommended distance was 6 feet or 13 feet, the equivalent to 1 or 2 metres. The US is still clearly using the Imperial system. I'm going to call it the Imperial system. There are different names for it, but I'm using Imperial in this video. Now, are we using the metric system in Britain? Well, not entirely. Do we use the Imperial system? Well, it's complicated, bloody complicated, more complicated than the rules of cricket. I'm an English teacher, and sometimes I get a student who wants to say something in English using metric measurements, and they say that they weigh, 76 kilos, and I say, how do you say that in English? And they want a quick answer, and I don't quite know what to say. I don't want to take them down that rabbit hole of British measurement weirdness. If you grew up in the UK, as I said, it's normal. But to an outsider, this arcane system is daunting, to say the least. But today, we are descending that rabbit hole because I'm going to explain it all. So let's jump in. Listen to our podcast, Zeitgeist Banana. You can find it on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and all good podcast platforms. Hello and welcome to Let Them Talk TV. The world is divided up into those countries using the metric system and 3 countries not using the metric system. And those are Liberia, Burma, and the US. And even Liberia has recently moved to introduce the metric system. The metric system was introduced by the French after the revolution in 1789, and it has since spread throughout the world. The other system, with feet, inches, pints, etc., I'll refer to as the Imperial system. There are 2 countries, to my knowledge, that straddle the 2 systems, and those are Canada and the UK. I'm not an expert on the Canadian system, so I won't talk about that, but I do welcome any comments from Canadians. Also, even if you're in a non-metric country, you can't entirely avoid the metric system. If you're sending rockets into space, you're going to use the metric system as it's an international thing and it's easier. If you work for NASA, then let us know in the comments. In science, in maths, in engineering, in research, they are going to use the metric system. You should also note that among metric countries, some might still use to some degree the imperial system or another system for a few things. I was in Guatemala for a few years ago, and I was surprised to find that in the market they were weighing things in ounces and pounds. Japan is a metric country, but they measure the surface area of a room in tatami mats because tatami mats have a standard size and that's what they use on their floors. In most countries, you buy eggs by the dozen or half dozen, not a metric 10. TVs or computer screens are often sold in inches, even in metric countries, and jeans too are usually sold with waist measurements in inches. And of course, measurements of time use a 12-based system, not a decimal system, and nobody seems to have a problem with that. Although it's not always been like that, because the Romans originally had a 10-month calendar, and we are still reminded of this with the names of our months: September, October, November, December, which mean the 7th, 8th, 9th and 10th months respectively. Then the Romans added January and February, so now these names are kind of out of sync. October should be called December, the 10th month, because that's what it is. And 2,000 years later, we still haven't updated the names. After the French Revolution, the French briefly introduced decimal time with 10 hours in a day and 100 minutes in each hour, but it never caught on. What about the UK? Well, let's start where the UK has gone fully metric: money and weather. Britain's currency decimalised in 1971. It's hard to believe, but before that, the money was so mystifying. Here we have a mug from 1970, whose aim is to help the confused populace to understand the new currency. On this side, we have the old pounds and pence, and here the equivalent in the decimal currency. One pound, Britain's beloved pound, was divided up into pennies. How many pennies? How many pennies in a pound? 240. Originally, £1 was a lot of money. In Anglo-Saxon times, 240 pennies was equivalent to £1 of weight in silver. So here we have 1 penny, 3 pennies or threepence. Strange to think that you have a unit of currency of 3. This coin, the florin, was the beginning of decimalisation in Britain. It was introduced in 1849. It was a tenth of £1, radical at the time. And sometimes you didn't talk about pounds, you talked about guineas. A guinea was £1 and 1 shilling. I've never really understood that one. Now, crazy it seems, there was some logic to the old system. The imperial system is usually, I stress usually, divisible by 12 rather than 10. And it's easier to divide things by 12 than 10. £1, 240 pence, you can split that in more ways than £1 with 100 pence. So yeah, it's convenient if you and your indeterminate number of business partners have just spent the evening selling jetted eels in the pubs around the East End of London, and then you come back to your lair and you can divide a pound of 240 pennies many different ways, whereas a pound with 100 pence has fewer options. Here you are. 240 is divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15, 16, 20, 24, 30, 40, 48, 60, 80 and 120. Whereas 100 is divisible merely by 1, 2, 4, 5, 10, 20, 25 and 50. Try dividing a pound between 3. It's impossible. But in the old system, you could. So if you're living in a mostly illiterate society and you just divide small quantities up amongst family and friends, then the imperial system makes some sense. However, in the industrial age where you're an engineer or you're building bridges or you're calculating water pressure for your hydraulic pump, it makes no sense at all. Let's move on to temperature. Until the 1980s, Britain used Fahrenheit. Then they started giving both Fahrenheit and centigrade on the weather forecast. For a time they showed the weather forecast in centigrade, but with Fahrenheit shown in smaller letters below, for those who were confused by the new system. But I reckon now everyone uses centigrade. I can't think of the last time I heard someone in Britain using Fahrenheit for weather or in any other context. That's the easy part. Now it starts to get difficult. Let me tell you that I was at school in the 1970s. Yes, that's right. And at that time, I only learned the metric system. Because they told me, they said, by the time you become an adult, Gideon, the imperial system in the UK will have died out. It's 2020 now, and it's still alive. You can imagine that I personally get confused because I learned the metric system at school, but going out into the real world, they're often using different measurements. Let's have a look at that. If you're driving on British roads, you'll notice that the speed signs are in miles per hour. Distances are in miles. This is true in conversation too. You'd say it's 200 miles from Leeds to London and not 300 kilometres. Most people would say that. However, for shorter distances, I think most people will use metres. Where's the bank? It's about 50 metres down the road rather than 100 yards down the road. I think few people under the age of 93 use yards anymore. Okay, I haven't done a survey, but if you do still use yards, you're in the UK, let us know in the comments. However, on road signs, you still see yards, feet and inches. Look at this sign I came across while walking through the suburbs of London recently. Do you know what it means? Well, beware, because in 325 yards, you're going to go under a bridge, and if your vehicle is higher than 11 feet and 0 inches, you're in trouble. But how many British people, let alone foreigners, would understand that sign? I would venture that this is an accident waiting to happen. Yes, in addition to your 93-year-old grandmother and outdated road signs, there is one organisation that uses miles and yards when giving directions. And that is none other than the bastion of state-of-the-art technology, a high-tech company, Google. Yes, that's right. If you search for directions in the UK, you'll be told in imperial measurements, okay? And really, it's very annoying. I want to switch over to metric. I don't know how. Google, why are you doing this? Britain went metric in 1973. Pull your finger out. And yet for very short distances, this gets really strange. For very short distances, a lot of people will revert to the imperial system. For example, I stood about 2 feet away from the edge of the cliff. Snails are only a couple of inches in length. I don't know, I'm talking about snails, don't know, but I can't think of another example. Could you move the lamp a couple of inches, 6 inches to the left? So I think generally people are more familiar with meters because of athletics and the distances they use. Everyone knows 100 meters and 200 meters and 400 meters, but the Olympic Committee hasn't yet introduced a 10 centimeter race yet. So some people will continue to measure with small distances with inches because that's what they're more familiar with. For height, we exclusively use feet and inches. How tall are you? I'm 5'11". If you use meters, people will think you're foreign or weird. How tall are you? 1.78 meters. What did he say? It's okay, it's foreign. Okay. If you're buying or renting a house, they'll quote the surface area in square feet. But if you're buying a carpet or a parquet to cover the surface area, that'll be measured in a price per square metre. Office space is measured in square feet. Clothes are measured in inches, except for shoes, which is kind of a dead heat. Your friendly sales assistant at the shoe shop will understand both size 10 and 44. Just for your information, English shoe sizes are based on barleycorns. One size is 1 barleycorn, which is equivalent to 1/3 of an inch. There you are. Dimensions are measured in imperial measurements. Screens are measured in inches, as they are in many metric countries, as I said before. Pizzas measured in inches when they need to be measured. For weight in Britain, we generally use kilos, except when we're talking about people. Almost all the products you get in the grocery store, in the supermarkets, they're sold in metric measurements, in kilos or in grams. The exception could be at the deli counter, where people sometimes ask for things in ounces or in pounds, but even this is becoming rare. If you go to the market, fruit and veg weighed in kilos. Some greengrocers still insist on displaying the price per pound, but according to the law, the price per kilo should be more prominent than the price per pound. So this sign is actually illegal. For people, we use stone. For example, I'm 12 stone. Side note, the plural of stone is stone. 12 stone, 3 pounds. The plural of pound is pounds, you may have noticed. Some young people will use kilos, but this is rare. As with height, if you use kilos, people will think you're foreign or weird. But if you just use pounds, people will think you're weird or American, because in the UK it's stone we use. The exception is if you get weighed or measured by your doctor, then that would legitimise the use of metric measurements in kilos or in metres. Here's a test for you. How tall are you in feet and inches? How much do you weigh? That's your homework. For liquids, milk is sold in pints, but to all you refined millennials out there, almond milk and all other plant-based non-dairy alternatives are sold by the litre. Beer in pubs is sold in pints, but beer sold in the supermarket will be sold in litres. Other liquids such as cooking oil, bottled water is sold in litres. A pint, by the way, is 564 millilitres, slightly more than half a litre. You fill up your car with petrol and the price is quoted per litre. But of course, when you drive away, the speedometer will tell you the speed in miles per hour. Even though British people use the Imperial system, almost everybody could tell you how many centimetres there are in a metre, or how many metres in a kilometre, how many grams in a kilo. However, most British people, they don't really know the Imperial system. I did a non-scientific survey amongst some of my English friends, and they didn't know in many cases. What about you? How many feet in a yard? I'll just 3. How many inches in a foot? That's 12. How many yards in a mile? 1,760. How many pounds in a stone? That would be 14. 14? Don't know why. Answers on a postcard. How many ounces in a pint, a pound? 16. Why 16? I don't know. You can half 16 many different ways. I guess it's something to do with that. What's the freezing point of water in Fahrenheit? 32 degrees. That's right. Generally, I think most people agree that the metric system is a lot easier. The only advantage I can think of is that it's usually divided up by 12. And secondly, imperial measurements are better at expressing things figuratively. Metric measurements are just too precise, too scientific. The very fact that imperial measurements are imprecise gives it an advantage here. For example, an inch can be used as a verb, and it can be used to mean a short distance in general. Okay, for example, the two sides have been negotiating all day, and I think they are inching closer to a deal. They are centimetering closer to a deal. No, it doesn't work. You want to join the orchestra, but at the moment you are miles away from the required level. You're kilometres away. No, it doesn't work. From the top of the hill, you can see for miles and miles. For kilometres and kilometres, well, I don't know, maybe, not really though. Miles has has poetry built within it, but kilometres just sounds too scientific, too precise. Now, I know we should change completely to the metric system, but the problem is, it is what it is. If you grew up with the old system, then you're used to it. So it's not really a priority. People are worried about jobs and education and safety and health, especially during this global pandemic. But virtually no one is going to vote for a candidate because he's calling for full metrication. People just don't care that much. So I guess things are going to stay as they are, even though the truth is that but for a few small advantages of the old system that I mentioned, the metric system is miles better. So what's the situation where you are? Do you only use the metric system, or do you have another way of counting? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Bye.